Jose Torres is the Building Decarbonization Coalition's California Director. Before BDC, Jose worked in the California Environmental Justice Alliance's as the Energy Equity Program Manager, where he worked to build a more equitable and democratic energy system for working families. Before venturing into the nonprofit space, Jose worked at the California Energy Commission's Office of Governmental Affairs, and both at the California State Assembly and the Senate. His career in public service started as a California Senate Fellow in the office of Senator Alex Padilla. Jose is proud to come from a working-class immigrant family that continues to drive his passion to fight for a clean and equitable future. In his free time, he likes to screenwrite social and political dramas, hike, and listen to live music. Welcome, Jose. And this is the last presentation of the day. I really appreciate you coming and doing some encapsulation. You seem to be like almost a perfect vessel for a whole bunch of different presentations. So take it away. Thank you.
No pressure?
Not at all. No, actually, I thought like, oh, should I lower it? And I was like, no, why should I? Look at his birthday.
No, thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you. And I know often, right, a lot of folks with the different expertise are presenting on different aspects of building electrification and different components of the energy sector. So, you know, as someone that comes from politics, coalition building, and I'd say, you know, softer sciences, you know, bear with me. And I think the goal is to kind of discuss California's trends and discuss prioritizing EJ and low-income communities, right? So we'll go through that. But just a little bit about myself. You heard it all in terms of like the bio, but the BDC. So the BDC, or the Building Decarbonization Coalition, we unite different industry stakeholders with, you know, energy providers, environmental organizations, local governments, and NGOs and others to power California's homes and workspaces with clean energy. The focus is to create safe, affordable, and healthy communities through all electric buildings. And, you know, just to set the context for this presentation, right, that's our goal. But I also see kind of an opportunity to do a lot of things, right, with electrification that maybe we don't always lead with. You know, through electrification, I think we have the opportunity to create a new economy and repair some injustice in our society, right? To many folks in the environmental justice and low-income communities, not only are fossil fuels extractive, right, and the fossil fuel industry, right, some also feel intimidated by the clean energy industry, right? And although it's less extractive to the earth, some folks still feel like it can be extractive to people, right? So that's kind of part of the context I'll discuss today, right? Not to minimize the progress and the effort and all the good that went into it, but just kind of to add some context and talk about how it connects to building decarbonization and some of the trends happening in California. So to summarize, hopefully I can give you a rough idea of the context and landscape of California, as well as the trends of building decarbonization in the building decarbonization space. And, you know, from there, we can also brainstorm on not only how we can move fast, but how we can also bring people along with us. And if we have some time, we can discuss what all this means to power building and potentially discuss a case study and do some more brainstorming. But I think the idea is to kind of talk about building decarb, but also kind of bring everything together and talk about how we can bridge the realities of the market, science, and so on, and connect it to the realities of the political conditions, the trends, and the living conditions of Californians. So I'll go fast through the general background, since it sounds like in different iterations, folks covered different pieces of this. But I think just some highlights. California needs a strategy that targets both existing and new buildings, right? And we think the strategy needs to prioritize environmental justice in low-income communities. And, you know, the rest of the points I think y'all were familiar with, and I think Pablo kind of touched upon some of them, but just some California-specific statistics. You know, electric buildings can be cheaper, healthier, more climate friendly, but California is still expanding the gas network faster than any state. That's just something to kind of ground us a little bit. Residential and commercial buildings are responsible for roughly 25% of California's greenhouse gases, about 10% of direct emissions though, just to be specific. And about 12 million Californians are regularly exposed to levels of nitrogen dioxide, right, from gas stoves that would violate outdoor air standards. So just setting the context for why building electrification is important, right, and some of the benefits that we can kind of get, right? And I guess to further elaborate Just some quick facts. I think some of them were already kind of demonstrated in the previous conversation, but just some to hone in on. In terms of affordability, you can avoid up to $120 million in ratepayer costs a year, avoid $1 billion of stranded assets, and reduce construction costs by 1.5K to 5K per housing unit. So all this means, right, hopefully lower bills, hopefully, cheaper construction, and of course the health benefits and the CO2 benefits I think y'all have heard about pretty extensively, hopefully. That being said, right, the quick overview of what we consider kind of building decarbonization here in California as of right now, right, we're trying to replace, of course, the gas stove, furnace heater, gas dryer, and gas water heater with heat pump space heaters, heat pump water heaters, electric or heat pump dryers, and induction stoves. And something, I guess, to ground us for the next piece of the presentation is as you think of these first three slides and just kind of the overall context, really think about, in the context of prioritizing kind of, politics and people's lives, right? Not to minimize the importance of replacing appliances, right? Because obviously I work for BDC for a reason, because I believe in the cause, but to really kind of connect it to what else is going on, right? As I go over these trends, right, you'll see evident challenges and opportunities to not only move the issue forward, but also consider why we need to prioritize the most vulnerable communities and, do a little more than just replacing appliances, right? And not to minimize the impact and the importance of that, but just to kind of hopefully give folks an eye as to why some folks might be reluctant or to be fully supportive of the BA community immediately. So in that piece, right, some of the issues that I'll just jump into briefly, right, are extreme heat, wildfires, housing insecurity, energy burden, workforce, blackouts and flex alerts, and the California recall. And there's probably more things that are impacting the California space, to say the least, like COVID, right? But didn't put it in here. But this is just hopefully a quick run through as to how we can kind of connect the pieces and also understand how building decarb can be the spear and can be paired with a lot of these things to address a lot of these issues. Extreme heat. For many folks, right, I think many of y'all have read, heat waves are becoming more frequent, intense, longer across the state, of course, but across the nation. And this is something that, kind of just reminds us that climate change is here and reiterates why it's important to fight in every way we can to push for, policies that can help us fight climate change. But in addition to that, unfortunately, right, extreme heat events are obviously dangerous to human health and even fatal, right? Thousands of people, across the Pacific Northwest and California and Canada try their best without access to air conditioning to kind of deal with the heat, right? And that happens in California as well. And unfortunately, several hundred people across the Northwest and Canada died, right? That's just something to kind of bring and remind us of what it really means to deal with extreme heat. Not only that, right? Studies show that low-income and environmental justice communities trend harder than wealthier neighborhoods. And that's something that we could probably see even in California. Although there are environmental justice and low communities all across the state, not to minimize that or minimize any of those communities, there happens to be a lot of communities that live in the inland in the hotter areas, right? Because of cost of living and a bunch of other reasons. And so you could kind of see how this proves true even in California. The other big piece is low-income households are also less likely to have air conditioning. And I think this cuts across urban and rural and inland areas because, folks found out that poverty was actually a better predictor of whether a household had access to air conditioning or not, even above climate. And, I have real life anecdotes of that, family members and friends that, had to use fans in 110-degree heat. So just to kind of, put the perspective as to if you're someone that is dealing with extreme heat, you're unemployed, you're housing insecure, and someone talks to you about replacing an appliance, right? Unless you understand its connection to what you're doing and to your living conditions, it might not be a priority. And I think the first thing that comes to mind with extreme heat, of course, is heat pump space heating, right? Not only is it an opportunity to address the issue, right, of greenhouse gases, but it also is an opportunity to alleviate and adapt to the climate that's happening in real time. And before I continue, as I go, please feel free to ask questions and interact. I welcome that, especially if it's something urgent or something that just caught your attention. And I think there'll be more opportunities later in the presentation where I have some concrete questions where we can talk about things. But please do feel free to do that. So next is wildfires, right? When I think about wildfires, right, there's a lot of tragedy, of course. There's a lot of things that we can hopefully do better moving forward. But the reality is also it's a vivid representation of climate change. So when I think about, wildfires, right, you could look at 2020, right? Let me go to the next slide. Wildfires in 2020, 4 million acres, specifically 4.2 million acres burned last year, right? That's the equivalent to Los Angeles, Orange County, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz County, the counties combined. 112 million tons of greenhouse gases. Lives lost, right? This is something to consider, right, when we're thinking about building decarbonization policy and what's the nexus to building decarb, right? I think smoke. Of course, building decarb will hopefully help us, right, as we start to move forward, prevent these events, or at least eventually kind of get us to a point where we can address climate change and prevent it from getting worse. But in real time, we also have the opportunity to provide people with clean homes and protect them from smoke, right? The volume of fine particles spewed by California's wildfires last year was nearly 1.2 million tons, according to CARB, right? That's more than 120 times the total amount emitted by all of its cars, trucks, and buses that same year, right? So I think, again, thinking of decarb and those 4 appliances and that spirit approach, right? Not to minimize it, and I think that's definitely an important way to approach the issue, but to just reiterate, I think the point that as we think about wildfires, if we're gonna seal homes and hopefully weatherize them and protect people from outdoor smoke, we can hopefully also protect them from indoor pollutants, right? And improve their indoor air quality with electrification and kind of make that connection and that nexus to people. Next on the list, housing and security, right? And this is just to ground us, right? It's some of the things I'm talking about, some of them are long-term things, some of them are temporary, and there's different complexities to them, right? But a lot of Californians live, are renters. I believe the stat is 44% of all state residents are renters. Even before COVID-19, over half of renter households were housing cost burden, right? Pay more than 30% of their total income in rent. And more than 1 in 4 renter households were severely cost burdened, pay more than 50% of their income in rent. An interesting fact is not only renters, but also folks that own homes, right? Homeowners as well. 1 in 3 homeowners with mortgage were cost burdened before COVID-19 as well. So again, just kind of setting the ground for kind of the different trends and the conditions and the issues that are important to Californians and of course to the California political space. So as we think about housing and security and we think about building electrification, y'all have heard the stats about new construction. So I think those are things that I think a lot of us speak to. But in terms of existing buildings, those are some of the difficult conversations that we're having and that we need to continue to have to ensure that folks don't feel like they're going to get displaced and to show them why they won't get displaced and to also work out solutions. Newsom has extended the eviction moratorium right through, I believe, September 31st, 2021. But at the federal level, it's running out, right? So I think these are all real life conditions that hopefully kind of ground us in like how building decarbonization fits into this space, but should also consider how it interacts with all these different components. Energy burden, of course, is one that I think many of y'all are familiar with. Some customers in different utilities pay about 80% more per kilowatt an hour than the national average. In other spaces, 45%, and sometimes double, right? Of course, there's more complexity to that. Don't want to minimize that. We're also more efficient and there's also opportunities to make things better. but I think it's something to really hone in on and think about when folks maybe feel lukewarm to the idea. Some of it is misinformation, right? From opponents to building electrification in terms of the real savings that we can get from a heat pump space heater, a heat pump water heater, even on the operational slash energy cost side. But some of it is complex questions, right? On the induction stove side, the potential for specific rates for BE. I know there's some TOU specific rates for building electrification that some of the utilities are working on, and I think those are all steps in the right direction. But something else to focus on, to think about, right? What else do we need to do to ensure that the value proposition to folks around the state is important and is an easy switch? And the other thing to add, utility debt, right? Official estimates of unpaid water and energy bills, right, accumulated during the pandemic. I think they're about 2.7 billion, maybe more. And, they've been growing rapidly, right? I think it was 1.7 in energy specifically. So that just adds more to that energy burden, concern, and context. Workforce, right? Another complex item. Again, understand the facts in terms of 100,000 full-time equivalent jobs could be added to California even after the losses in the fossil fuel industry, right? And some of those jobs, right, I think 3 out of 5 would be high road jobs, good paying jobs. But those losses, are important to the pipe fitters, are important to folks that work in union jobs. And, I think exploring those questions about market stability and good jobs and how to ensure we can do as much as we can to secure the alternative to be as attractive to not only working people in EJ communities, but also just powerful, entities of our government, right, that influence powerful stakeholders, will help us hopefully move the issue forward, but also design the policy in a much better way.
Can I ask real quickly,
Yeah.
because the pipe fitters, because some of the people who are invested in the gas infrastructures, they're invested in their life skills, and their life path, they're invested in that way. Um, what do you think is actively being done? Not just sort of chatted about, but is there anything being done to think about how to convert them out? I mean, Panama said that the official plan is that everyone just gets to retire, and like they just slowly lose staff by retirement, but no one loses a job ever. That's the official like union path for this, is that they get to do this as long as people are alive, more or less, that got jobs, which isn't the same time frame as 2030.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. And, I think some folks mentioned transition stipends, right? Not just for building electrification, but for, the power sector as well. More on the supply side. And those are ideas to explore. But I think just concretely in terms of building decarbonization, as difficult that some of these things may be, potentially looking at, dual fuel systems for a short period of time, right? That's not ideal, especially not from an environmental perspective, but it's something that some folks are thinking about. And if it would get us a better target in the long run, right, that's a conversation some folks might like to have, but others might not, right? But these are the kinds of conversations that are occurring, right? On the other end, there's also the gray water pipes. I think that's a much more amenable, proposal to some, where, if you're a pipe fitter, right, you want to ensure that the economic opportunity is still there, especially if you're not one of those retiring. Or if you think it's a good job that maybe you want to introduce someone in your family to, right? And that's what often happens, right? It's just like, how do you replace the economy in these places as well?
Before you move on there, just so you know, one of the developments that we're supporting right now is a subdivision of homes, and it's like 60, 70 homes for farm worker families. So USDA Rural Development in Bakersfield. And we're collecting all of the gray water from the homes into central tanks and then distributing them. And I'm sure that other people are doing this at like the subdivision scale, but I don't know who they are. But I am interested to see what the cost increase will be, and we'll get it line itemed out, so that we can try to inform perhaps what it would look like to make a deal with the pipe fitters to say mandated gray water plumbing for every house in return for stopping the gas plumbing in every house.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? In terms of, but I think something that, I do want to caution, right? And I think it goes back to the entire narrative that hopefully y'all are catching is, understanding kind of where we fit in this space, right? In terms of a home, right? We might have to support the gray water first, right? And then negotiate interim benchmarks, right? Um, and that's just the power and leverage of labor, right? Not only because they're powerful, but also because the real living conditions that people think about, right, are housing, you know, jobs. A lot of us think about climate, but as y'all have seen, right, when something is even 5 years away, even if it's vivid for some of us, it's something that often we have to consider when negotiating, right, and when thinking about the space. As hard as it may be for some of us that consider this the most important thing we can think of for a lot of reasons, right? I know I'm preaching to the choir when I think about climate change, not only from everything I've listed, but also from migrant patterns that can potentially impact economies, wars, right? A bunch of other things that have worldwide impacts, right? That I think are going to be pretty serious if we don't take it serious. So
I think that gray water plumbing first as an offer to say we'll give you more work, we'll like make good offer, almost like a reparations. You think like first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna really take care of you so that we butter you up, and then we're going to stop the gas. Is that
I wouldn't say that's exactly it, but I think some version of good faith, right? I think
good?
we have to show good faith. It might be at a local level, right? And those are conversations that we need to have. But I think showing folks that it can't be fully transactional, but we also have to acknowledge the realities of the political space, right? So it's a complex thing of doing the right thing and showing that we can do the right thing and recognizing our leverage and our power while also understanding how to get to our goals, right? Um,
I'm glad you're in charge of this. Good answer.
thank you. Um, and just to further add, blackouts, whether they're a big threat or not, right? I've seen different articles. It's something to consider. Um, you know, it's something to consider in terms of how people are seeing the space, right? And in terms of the questions of resilience, although we know, even some of the gas appliances need electricity to function. This is just the perception. And the hope is that we can create resilient spaces, right? We know heat pump water heaters have the potential to store some energy, right, and heat up water at a later time. That's one cool feature that we can kind of think about in terms of the concept of blackout, but also just considering what else we can pair with building electrification to ensure that um, we address an issue that feels really real, really present. And a governor many years ago got recalled for this, right? So it's something that is pressing in real time, something that folks think about. Sorry. And then, of course, the California recall. So this is more temporary, right, than some of the other ones. But this kind of adds the political piece to all the other elements that I think are both political, but they're also, real life situations that we should navigate with care and that we should think about and really take serious. The California recall has changed the conditions of it, potentially the political approach of some folks. Um, I think many folks don't think it's plausible that Governor Newsom loses, but there's more and more articles about it potentially not being as easy because there's not as many folks that are passionate to go out and vote for him. But also, in terms of, the folks who will be there for him, right? That I think he's calculating kind of the political machine that he needs in order to win. All this impacts our ability to influence, our ability to think, and the kinds of stakeholders that we need to work with. So these are a couple of things to think about. So I guess I'll open the question to y'all. What other issues do you think impact California in the efforts to decarbonize buildings that maybe I didn't bring up here, just so we have some level setting?
Let's see here. Well, Caillou-san asked, one more question. Have you or your team, oh no, I think this is Caillou's writing to Pablo, pardon me, sorry. So Alison asked, we will still need gas workers and plumbers to decommission the gas system safely, right? Do you think that the decommissioning is enough work to satisfy this cohort of employees?
No, I mean, that could change, but I think if you look at the political conditions right now, definitely not. Just because that's something that has been tried on the oil side, and it has not gotten any traction. And I think it would probably be the same, just because then there's an end to it. Maybe for the folks that are about to retire, what about the folks that just started? So I think there's an element of that we have to navigate. So that's something that I think in the past has been used, and it hasn't worked as effectively as I even would have thought back then. Yeah, anything.
Well, one of the things that I didn't see there, that I'm a technological kind of person, I guess. Although I've anyway, even said all the complexity of the politics of this. I very much appreciate the complexity you brought to it, and so many presenters of there's so many different elements of it. On the technical side, there are really superior heat pumps in Japan, which is a center of heat pump design. Not the only place. Italy, China, these are places of centers of heat pump design. But Japan does seem to have the highest efficiency heat pumps using alternative refrigerants, and I've been doing it for a long time. They've always invested in CO2, for instance, back in 2000. CO2 heat pumps are coming out. We still have only one of like 8 different products out there, just in Japan. So I was wondering, have you given any thought to how we can use our sort of Pacific Rim relationship with Japan to accelerate electrification of California?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that's something that probably Panama and team are looking at. Maybe not that specific, right? But they're working more on national work. So I know we're thinking globally about our relationship to manufacturers and taking that very serious. There's a lot of them are our members. So that's something I'll have to get back to you about. But in terms of like just the questions about technology, right, and kind of looking at alternatives and things that are improving it, definitely counting on that, I think, to help us kind of get through, right, and have better value propositions, if I'm understanding kind of what you asked correctly. But I think it's something where even if the value proposition is there, which I think there is in a lot of different spaces, right, and there'll be better value propositions to your point, whether it's, because there's no refrigerants or because it's cheaper or because it does a lot more in terms of health. I think the piece that I want to maybe reiterate, not reiterate, but clarify, and that hopefully I'm presenting is all these pieces represent the community kind of power building, political aspects of building decarb, right? And very simplified, of course, but just to give folks an idea. And we do have to connect it to the technical, to the market, and to the science reality that I think many folks within the building on decarb space are functioning, right? I think the approach is often of like, how do we take on the market to really get through with gas appliances? And my point isn't to disregard that, right? It's not to disregard that. It's not to disregard the technological advances. Is to use that to build a bridge to the other pieces, right? And to your point, that if there's something that can give us more to address some of these real life kind of.
Well, here's a thought I had
Yeah.
that came up in our uh, Wei Tai Kwok, as he was presenting, I think it was yesterday, I'm getting a little lost in my days, he was just making the point that Chinese Americans, he's a patriotic Chinese American, his parents were immigrants and refugees from Virginia, that he, though, has been trying to be a cultural emissary, particularly in times of geopolitical strife between China and America, on behalf of America, very clearly trying to make a relationship, back. And it seems like California has a disproportionate number of Japanese and Chinese Americans, people who are 1, 2, 3, 4 generations back, but still have cultural ties that are authentic. That's been reiterated many times and during the sessions about the cultural emissary nature of decarbonization and reaching out into disadvantaged communities, or just communities, just like how cultural emissaries are a real thing. So I am chatting with you about this idea that I'm having. I've been long thinking that Japan and China were the key to decarbonizing California, and maybe there's an explicit role for trying to recruit Chinese and Japanese Californians, sort of in a role to try to bring over really what they have is much more advanced technologies than we do, way more efficient heat pumps, lots of different kinds of them, so much more diversity of form factors and we're not succeeding, I think, in solving cost barriers and barriers to where you can put the water heater or the heat pump. because we don't have access to like a fully elaborated electrical technological ecosystem of particularly the Asia side of Eurasia. So that's a thought. Do you have any thoughts in response to that thought?
Yeah, I'll have to think about it. I mean, I honestly haven't, thought about it from that perspective. I think, it's something that, I'll take back to Panama and team and just consider. I think that the goal though, it would be to, you know, think about California as an ecosystem, right, of different folks and build authentic, right, relationships with people to ensure that it's not just a strategy, but it's ethical and moral, right? And I think that's the balance that we have to navigate. It's even if it is strategic, right? We want to be ethical and moral. Not to say that we're not that wouldn't be, but I think threading that line is important and difficult, and hence why understanding everything I listed, I think is important, right? And then connecting that to the opportunities that might be there, right? But it has to be a collaboration, right? I think if we could move on, just because I know we're at time, but maybe to
Pardon, yeah.
yes, maybe just to
Well, and just so you know, we are at the time of discussion. So the only thing we have next is just 30 minutes of chatting. So you can take your time here.
okay, cool, thank you. Um, yeah, it goes to your point. Who do you think are the stakeholders most affected by change or absence of change in decarbonization policy, right? I think this is something to think about when we think about, everything else that hopefully y'all saw in terms of the California landscape, but also when we're thinking about policy solutions and policy design and even technology. But yeah, just thoughts on that. Who do folks think are the stakeholders most affected by change or absence of change in decarbonization policy? Of course, the presentation is saying EJ and vulnerable communities and workers. Are there other folks that y'all come to mind, or is there agreement on that?
Well, I would just put out there pregnant moms. It's one very particular part. It's like a very specific thing, like women. And then within the life cycle of a woman, there's the point in time in which they're holding a baby. And all women are really vulnerable at that period, and the babies themselves, to of all types of stresses. Like it's really hard to cool off when you're pregnant. It's really hard to like safely maintain temperature, or being more afflicted by viruses, or just there's a long list. Nitrogen dioxides and formaldehydes off of gas stoves, or smog outside. It's like that's one regardless. And yeah, farmers. Jamie Jang is putting out farmers, and Alice Sung is wanting to say like children.
Yeah, yeah, and I think hopefully this question is a helpful guide in kind of grounding what we're doing, right? Whether we're power building and working with community members that might be more visible, but also whether we're creating technology and working on science, right? I think this question, at least for me, is a good guide on how to think about designing policy when it comes to building electrification. Because one requires speed, right? The other requires you to slow down. So you have to really weigh kind of what is the best way to have an outcome that benefits folks. And there's some folks that will suffer either way. And I think that's where the idea of prioritizing these communities comes to mind, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And what does the work in building decarbonization look like today? Yeah, just thoughts on that. What do y'all think it looks like today?
To me, it looks like solar installers and HVAC contractors. That's like the people I've seen actually in the business.
Okay, no, someone else.
Jang says community building, which, boy, if that hasn't been a theme, then yeah, community building. Michael Winkler writes, as the BDC report stated, one big threat is wealthy electrifying and abandoning the gas grid piecemeal and sticking low-income people with the cost. So flipping that script and focusing on, as things, if you get to see Dr. Anthony Kinslow, he did a really strong presentation, I think, on a specific model of the utilities investing per meter and electrifying and owning equipment as a way of that robust financial model to avoid this problem, and less rebates and more targeted ownership of electrification strategies to focusing money on decarb on disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like there's alignment if I get In
Yeah.
terms of not exactly right, because I didn't get the honor of seeing it, but I think maybe as I see folks participating, maybe we could move on. How do we balance EJ and community leadership, labor, and the climate crisis? Right, that kind of puts some of the things that we're looking at, and it goes back to the point that we should definitely think about the climate crisis and take it very serious, and take the science and take the market aspects of it serious. But connecting it to the rest of California will help us be stronger. And this is kind of what we're exploring right now. It's the pathway to a healthy, affordable, and resilient home, right? Thinking of how we get to that point. And this is just brainstorming right now, but thinking of the challenges as opportunities, right? And kind of thinking of taking those on. And some of the work we're doing already connects directly to this, right? Clean and resilient appliances is the spear, I think, for a lot of us. But it bringing everything else along is important, right? And that whole home perspective is going to be key to really humanizing, and I think removing maybe some of the politics that has been difficult to navigate in the space, right? Taking on housing displacement, operational costs, upfront costs, equitable planning, workforce and market stability, right? That's not only labor, but that's also ensuring contractors and installers have what they need to have confidence in the market. And so it's almost like, how do you bridge the realities of the market and science with like the realities of what people are feeling and potentially the unintended consequences that could happen. And I guess just to close out and then maybe open up for questions, I think this commitment is kind of probably the summary of kind of what we were trying to lay out, right? At the end of the day, right, these are just examples, right? But in real time, it's important to center equity and community voices and solutions because things are constantly changing. And it's important to center policy solutions to the human experience so that we're making a difference in people's lives and their quality of life. That's the challenge, because we will never be without unintended consequences, but we should try within reason to do our best, because we're always going to keep learning, right, in terms of something else that we could do better. But I think the best way to measure the threshold of what's enough is by engagement. Community members can make decisions and do cost benefit analysis as well, as long as they are included at the table. So I think that's probably the best way that I think I can frame that. But yeah, I'll stop sharing and see if there's any questions.
Well, in order to do that, it seems like the role of cultural emissaries to impacted communities is something that other people have mentioned, and I think that Panama, in his hiring practice, has done a pretty good job of trying to hire cultural emissaries, people who represent many different parts of the California experience. Is that true?
Sorry, I got distracted by the chat. Can you repeat the question?
Oh no, that's fine. Oh, good. You chatted and you put in your
Yeah.
email address. When okay, so I had this thought, or I keep on hearing an emphasis of the importance of creating cultural emissaries. This whole event, the theme was trying to recruit people who are from the Black, Indigenous, people of color experience, or trans, non-binary. We had a fantastic experience having an all-woman conference that would try to filter for excellence and then filter for people of color and trans, non-binary, for people who've been pretty explicitly discriminated against in society, and elevate some leadership within that experience. So how is that going in terms of how your organization, the Building Decarbonization Coalition, because it seems like your last slide there about the importance of listening and proceeding and centering these communities. I'm very interested in your operational, what are you doing? How are you doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of the models that I'm leaning towards and that we're trying to use is some of the ones that I've used when I was at Ceja, right? But I was on the other side. So at Ceja, but obviously me not being Ceja, me being the folks that we were working with, right? It was important to not only center the organization, but also really allow folks to engage at their pace and engage at the point that they're ready to enter. And that's hard. That's hard, especially when we feel pressure and urgency. But the thing is that environmental justice, labor, and other communities are not a monolith, right? So not only do we reach out to different folks and hopefully get different engagement from different people based on kind of whether they're next to renewable gas and they're more worried about that, or whether they're more concerned about gentrification and displacement, but you meet everyone where they're at. And one of the examples that I turn to is the Regenerate California campaign, right, that I built along with Sierra Club. You know, created principles, created goals, created targets. You know, the targets and everything were science-based, but then we paired it with like where the communities were organizing, and then we created targets that way. But we also considered the market conditions and labor, and decided to also focus on pushing for clean and renewable energy as well, targeted at disadvantaged communities. And I think that's how I feel like we're approaching the BE space now. It's really thinking about listening, repairing harm where harm has been done, and taking a step back, slowing down. But when slowing down, hoping that folks would come to the table and really help us move it. Um, but it's not easy, right? It takes time, it takes patience, and sometimes it takes kind of going through things that maybe seem like they might be unnecessary to some in the space, especially for experts, right? When someone that's an expert in the space feels like the obvious answer is this if you think about the market and the economics, or the obvious answer is this if you think about the technology, but you have to bring the community with you. And there might be an extra element that you didn't consider that will shift your policy design too, right? Even if you don't always get there, right? So it just um, I think that's how we're approaching it, right? And that means potentially MOUs, right, and ensuring the fundraising goes the majority to the organization you work with. It could mean just starting to talk. It could mean reconciliation, right? It depends which organizations and what, right? So it's a complicated matrix of navigating people, politics, and trying to be ethical and authentic at it.
Are you having I mean, COVID is making it hard for you to reach out, I assume, or maybe easy, like you can just show up via Zoom cameras. Are you starting to, I mean, you're a relatively recent hire, but I know like the organization itself has got a robust, you had a retreat, you guys set up a whole week-long effort of thinking about what you're going to do and such. So um, are you going to have forums with certain groups like low-income housing or farm workers, or like do you have a listening session?
Yeah, no, that's how I started. I started with the listening tour. I called it right, and it was just connecting with old friends, but in the new capacity, and really trying to share, that hopefully I'm here to help out and let me know what you need, and but it takes time, right? You got to build trust in your new capacity, and I think forums or like collaborating on comments and just larger, more formal things sometimes take time to get to depending on where the relationship's at. But hopefully, as time progresses, you could get small victories of being able to demonstrate that you're serious and that you're going to prioritize folks. And hopefully, this presentation is another example of that, right? Kind of sharing with like the entire zero carbon
Yeah.
community kind of the importance of considering the big picture, and we'll hopefully continue to try to do that and present it that be authentic both inside and outside the EJ space.
Yeah, I don't know if this event counts as an EJ space or not. I sort of tried to make it so implicitly, but everyone gets to come.
I'd say diverse space in different ways, right?
Yeah, well, it's certainly the presenters.
Right.
There's been I think 25 or 26 folks, and a lot of people have been really thoughtful, professional, detailed, specific, etc., about the work that they were doing with disadvantaged communities and why, and the benefits of that approach. And like I've been inspired. I got lots out of it personally. A little bit pooped at the end of it, though, I have to admit. So I want to see if anyone else wants to pop in any comments over in the chat that I can elevate. I think that one of the things that's going on here, Jamie Jang, this is not necessarily for you, Jose, but others can also jump in too on this one. Um, Jamie Jang says, one of the key limiting factors I learned yesterday and today is the total production of electricity by utilities. What can the state do to pave the way to increase total production for an electrified state? Now, Alice was, debating back. It's like, well, Jamie, part of the equation is supporting and incentivizing more distributed energy resources with solar and batteries. actually reducing the demand on the grid. And then Jamie writes back with, Alice, yes, I agree, but who bears that burden? Homeowners? And I'll put out there, I think that the analysis that my company's done shows that a vehicle to building car, so you have an electric car, 60 kilowatt hour car, 35 kilowatt hour car, 100, whatever. If you can sell like 5 kilowatt hours into the grid quickly with a tier 2 vehicle to building charger, just that modest amount of electricity will actually be so valuable that it pays for your whole utility bill. That's at least true in Humboldt County with our time of use rates and an electric vehicle with tier 2 vehicle building charging or vehicle to grid charging, like what the Ford Lightning is coming out with next year, what Tesla's had since 2019, but not released the software for it, what all the VWs coming out next year are going to have. I think that that is like this gigantic personal battery that people want. Like 30% of the Bay Area right now is buying electric vehicles, 8% of California last year. Like this is happening quickly, in California at least. So maybe, Jamie, the homeowners will bear some of that burden voluntarily by getting a car. And it will not be sort of this dramatic, like put a big, bank of batteries in your garage kind of thing, unless it's on wheels. And then things are cool. I think that is on a technical level, one of the most cost-effective solutions right now for balancing the grid that anyone is proposing. Like there's the long distance transportation strategy that we're doing right now with the Biden administration, trying to get long distance transmission wires. And there's articles about how challenging that is to get easements across people's properties. And sometimes it goes through disadvantaged communities and what's really going on here, to deliver electricity from one area to the city in terms of environmental justice versus doing more microgrid style of like taking solar during the day, storing it at night, and making sure we've got imports that can handle our winter demand, which I think Dr. Ashling Leilian showed today is actually like winter electricity is the most expensive and it's the highest demand. So there is still this issue of needing to have infrastructure, particularly for winter, to transmit electricity across state lines. Otherwise, we're really not going to succeed. So I think there's a hybrid, at least, that's cost effective. And Alice is saying, since all taxpayers fund these incentives, who fund the incentives are ratepayers or cap and trade or public goods charges, etc., that is one reason why I think we should direct the funds first to public schools where we all benefit. One, heat pump systems, decarbonized projects, and microgrids can improve the lives of many students for generations and provide resilience for communities, so not just one household. Alice is really good about refocusing our attention on community benefits and community resources, since we have to target, like we can't do everything at once. And by the way, she's focused previously on saying it should be disadvantaged communities. Pablo, he wrote, I think we will need lots of little optimizations. For example, water heating using heat pumps when there's low demand of electricity, and keep it as a way to store energy without an actual energy battery, and the same for electric cars. So Pablo is proposing optimization, basically shifting like distributed energy resources, shifting things around. And Ian Walker of Lawrence Berkeley National Labs writes, Alice, regarding utility rates, it is worth pointing out the proposals from the utilities to introduce massive rate hikes for buildings with solar PV, about $10 per month per kW for a home. So you'd pay $60 more a month if you had a 6 kW system, which is a little bit below average. People frequently have 8 kW right now for single family homes and 3 to 4 for apartments. And here's a horrible link to the proposal. Ian is right on. This is just disgusting. It's exactly the worst possible moment for us to disincentivize solar. And Jose, you wrote, is that right? Or maybe you should say your own thing.
Yeah, no, I think I was agreeing with the uplifting community resilience centers and just some have called it resilience hubs, right? Whether it's schools or critical facilities or other places like that. Worked on that when I was at Ceja, and got to work with the good folks over there, and we still support it. I think from the BE side, hopefully pollution free, right? Community resilience centers with heat pumps. So there's, since there's going to be storage and solar, I think in a lot of those iterations of how the cooling centers slash resilience centers are described, definitely think that's a path. But I also think homes are important, just because in some areas transportation and getting to those places are hard. Some places don't have buildings as well that are usable like that. Heard that from some of our Central Valley folks. They do want to construct those community resilience centers, so there will be the benefit. But I think if we can help with low income homes as well concurrently, I think that's something that will benefit folks directly as well.
Could you speak to you've seen there's some people with us with their hair on fire about the NEM rates defunding solar. So Alice Sung wrote, hey, can the BDC help with these criminal proposal to the CPUC to increase rates? What is the BDC's stand on NEM 3.0?
Let's talk about curveballs and hard questions.
Sorry.
I don't think we have an official stance as far as like I haven't, I can't speak for that, right?
Right. Your team is not yet developed.
We're not like engaged in the proceeding, right? We're not working directly on solar. I know we support clean and renewable energy, right? But I think beyond that, I can't speak directly to NAM. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. I think Tom Cabot, I want to elevate this here. He says, I agree with Pablo's idea that we don't need to extract kWh from electric vehicles. We can have variable smart charging into EVs that is grid gentle and EV gentle. Just like we can have variable recharging of heat pump water heaters that meets customer needs and is grid gentle. That is a sophisticated point. Thank you, Pablo and Tom. I hadn't thought of it quite that way. I think the vehicle to building is great for resiliency, and some people might be willing to make the bargain. If it eliminated their utility bills, like if you did it in Humboldt County, you could actually have no utility bill. It's like, well, maybe that's worth it. Particularly because also used electric vehicles can be pretty inexpensive compared to any other type of battery that has the same amount of storage in it. Like a battery on wheels, a used car is depreciated in value that you can just park it next to your house and have an emergency vehicle that was mostly doing grid services and make a lot of money. Just with the deal as it would be. Let's see. Kyoko Hibino wrote, after SoCalGas's Aliso Canyon gas storage facilities blowout in 2015, the capacity of the storage facility has been reduced to the minimum to 1/3 of full capacity. For the first 2 years, storage was shut down and there was no blackout. SoCalGas has been requesting to increase and back to business as usual, citing the need to make more gas available. The CPUC may grant this request this fall despite overwhelming opposition from communities and elected officials to this idea because of the public health crisis. CPUC needs to work on decarb electrification instead of going backward. How to deal with them when they don't listen to health impacts and economical impacts because of the health impact. So, Jose, could you speak to the BDC's approach to Aliso Canyon?
Yeah, the organization is definitely focused on being pro electrification. We're trying to promote the market, trying to promote solutions. As far as I know, I don't think we've taken on the gas side like that. Not to say that we don't pay attention, but I mean the facts speak for themselves, right? In terms of where things are at, right? Why we need to transition and why we need to phase out. But yeah, in terms of any specific work on Aliso Canyon, I'll have to check in, but I don't know of any, right? Because I think the mission of BDC is to be pro electrification, and there's other folks in the space that are taking on the battle elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, just on that note, I think there was also a SoCal gas compressor leak in the Central Coast that some of the Central Coast EJ and community organizations were working on. So yeah, there's a lot of things to think about, right, when it comes to that. But yeah, we're as far as BDC, yeah, nothing specific to say.
It's okay. I understand the role of being positive towards something and choosing your battles, so to speak. Alice writes, imagine what energy independence could do for low-income communities. Instead of being energy burdened with decarbonization and zero net energy solar and storage to zero carbon, they would never have to pay a utility past basic PCIA or minimal fees. You know, this is my chance to point out that this was the vision. You know, the Total Electric Award, Live Better Electrically vision. This is one of those things that you put on your cement, like walkway or up next to your door from 53 through about 83. They thought they were going to have clean nuclear power and that they were going to have it be so inexpensive. All it required was a meter, just for metering fees. Not that you pay any energy, but just to keep track of the fact that you were using it at all. And it doesn't seem like we're going to quite arrive there, but it's with the vehicle being such a huge battery, I'm starting to not see a reason why we couldn't, except for about 3 or 4 months in the wintertime, pull that off. But there is like a third of the year which the solar resources and all the grid flexibility management, et cetera, that you can think of won't pull it off. You need to have long distance distribution of some new resources in the winter. Okay, well, with that, I think that we should pause. It's been a fantastic 2 days. Thanks all of you that hung around this long. Thank you, Jose, for closing us out with a really helpful conversation about where California's going and why, and for whom first. And so thanks, everybody. It's been a super duper pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sean.